Reblin. I am professor of theology at Faculdades EST in São Paulo, Brazil. No, I didn't went through a wrong door, okay? My research field is focused on the relationship between theology and pop culture. Sometimes pop culture narratives can help us to understand better the world in which we live and try constantly to shape, as well as ourselves, how we organize our symbolic and culture world, our society, and so on. I will present an analysis of the comic book story written by David Goyer and published in the commemorative edition of Action Comics 900, which has as main topic Superman's renunciation of the US citizenship. Under the perspective of Latin America context, in times in which most people want to get a green card, the most American icon renounces his US citizenship. In order to this presentation fits into the scheduled time, I will divide in two parts: the plot of the story and my short impressions on it. Here is the story. The work here is rather an essay than a systematic study, since I come from the field of religion studies. The story written by David Goyer starts with a meeting with Superman and the President's National Security Advisor. The meeting is marked by an environment fulfilled by advisor's lack of trust or of US government itself, due to some recent actions of Superman which had wide media coverage. In fact, the reason for the meeting is just to hear the explanation of Superman about his attitudes. Superman went to Tehran to support people in a demonstration against Ahmadinejad's regime. Superman says, he wants to be effective at stopping things related to degradation of the basic human rights and so on, not just aliens and international threats, but real things. And the fact is that by doing that, he caused an international incident. And he caused an international incident because the Iranian government is accusing Superman of acting on the president's behalf. They are calling Superman's interference an act of war. That's what the advisor says to Superman. Superman then recognizes that the problem that his interference in the Middle East has caused, and as a result decides to advertise before the United Nations that he is renouncing the US citizenship in this story. And he says, and I quote, "I am tired of having my actions construed as instruments of US policy. The world is too small and too connected." Then it's the story. And my question here is, what does this renunciation mean? First, the plot says Superman doesn't want his action to be understood as instruments of US policy. Well, and he explains this, well, he's not a human and doesn't want to be considered as an American citizen. And as we know from the studies, being a citizen means belonging to a nation, having a homeland, and being supported by it. It means having rights and duties towards the society to which one belongs. And people with no place in the world, no citizenship, no opinion, no profession, or no action, reduced to their natural differentiation, their individuality, no longer have relevance to public life, to the human organization. But in this case, in this story, different from the people who have been rendered stateless, like the Second War, the Jewish, and subjected to any kind of violence, Superman is the one who decides to become stateless. And then we can think, well, is this rupture a formal rupture or a substantial rupture? A formal rupture, we can understand here that a formal rupture happens in the sense that the character is declared as no longer belonging to a nation. Superman's attitude in this way becomes ironic because we can identify in the real world rather a search for the best citizenship or a dual citizenship than a renunciation of one's own citizenship. Substantial rupture does not really happen in this story because it means denying cultural, social, and identitary characteristics. And as we know, Superman has a secret identity. He is in fact an American, raised as an American, shares moral and ethical values. And another question we can make here in this story by reading it is, well, the one who doesn't know that Superman has secret identity can think, can Superman be trusted? Can we lay our lives in a human who has no connection to, or an alien, someone who has no connection to anybody? And here comes then the hero archetype, because it is, we suppose that, well, he's a hero and he will follow principles and moral and ethical values in this way. Other questions we can make in this reading is, when proposing to defend the basic rights of every human being, which is the understanding that lays in his actions, since we realize that human rights are a polysemic, polyphonic, controversial concept, especially when we refer to the most fundamental rights of every human being. How does Superman think of being possible to implement human rights without the support of states, without political support? He wants to preserve human rights, but while being stateless. Well, will he act alongside, above, or under any state? How will he solve these problems? Under the reader's perspective, well, it's just a formal rupture because Superman does not cease to be an American, and for someone can be also a substantial rupture. There was an interview when this comic came up, and a former senator of the US, a Republican, said, this is a shame, this comic is unbelievable, because Americans should not apologize for being Americans. And we are the greatest country on earth because who we are and not in despite of it. And then, here, in this quotes, we can see then a substantial rupture in this. Well, the entire story, Superman has a deep relationship with the messianic ideas and the manifest destiny that we have to keep in mind by reading this story. And another question is, Superman becomes global then? And here I bring the idea of soft power. It's a quote of Joseph Nee. Military power and economic power are both examples of hard command power that can be used to induce others to change their position. Hard power can rest on inducements or threats, but there is also an indirect way to exercise power. A country may obtain the outcomes it wants in world politics because other countries want to follow it, admiring its values, emulating its example, aspiring to its level of prosperity and openness. In that sense, it is just as important to set the agenda in world politics and attract others as it is to force them to change through the threat or use of military or economic weapons. This aspect of power, getting others to want what you want, I call soft power. It co-opts people rather than coerces them. And then it's the question isn't or is not what Superman are doing here. Right? Then just some last ideas. Following the idea of soft power, it becomes possible to evaluate how the entertainment industry propagates ideas of being an American and how it shapes world views. Surely, there is not a monolithic idea because we can watch movies or read comics that represent the US in a romantic way, sometimes in an epic way, as well as we can realize the opposite, a critical, dubious point of view. In any case, there are only a few speeches that compromise the United States in a dichotomous way, but the very representation of identity can follow the same process. Thus, the hypothesis that we can identify through the reading of Goyer's story is that Superman is not a superhero who becomes stateless, but rather a superhero who becomes cosmopolitan, in the sense that the United States are taken in a global and not merely local perspective. To be cosmopolitan would mean rather the way of being a kind of global American. In this direction, the renunciation would not be a denial of citizenship, but rather its own reassurance. That is, it means asserting that the American way of living can be experienced all over the planet, for good or bad. The graded symbol of American pop culture extends thus to the entire planet. The blurring of the distinction is, in fact, its expansion. Just to end then, at the end of this exploratory journey, it is possible to reiterate that there is rather a formal rupture, but not necessarily a substantial rupture in the renunciation of citizenship announced by Superman. Informal or discursive rupture, Superman expresses dissatisfaction with US foreign policy and decides not to have the action tied to the US government. If it is possible and extraterrestrial to implement actions of peace and justice above or outside of the political bodies of the nations without their support, it is a question to be debated and reflected further. What's embedded in the story is a criticism of the government. For the Americans, besides the criticism to the government, the story gives rise also to be understood as a critique to the country, citizenship, at the end to the American way of living. In any case, for non-American readers, the resignation of Superman will not be felt as much as in the United States. After all, the character will still wearing the colors of the flag, their stories will still be written by Americans, published there and imported in Brazil. Not that it is negative, providing criticism, entertainment and reflection, and the ability to go up, up, and away. Thank you.